My name is Grace Miller, and I am telling my own story. I live in a narrow blue house on Walnut Street in Cleveland, United States of America. The porch tilts a little, and the railing has a loose screw, but the house holds me the way a palm holds a coin. In the mornings, I hear a small creak behind the fence, and the city buses out on the avenue. On the kitchen shelf, I keep a glass jar with $412 in it, most of it in small bills and quarters. I call it my door fund because I want a stronger lock and maybe a new frame that will not shake when the wind kicks up. Daniel is my husband. He likes press shirts, lined shoes, and bright Sunday games on television. He calls the house our anchor, and sometimes he calls me that too, as if I were a heavy thing meant to hold a ship in place. Across the street lives Mrs. Harper, who wears red lipstick and a wool coat even in spring. She tells me I should see New York because lights there can wake a tired soul. The farthest I have gone alone is Chicago for teacher training. I ate a hot dog by the river and told myself I would return for fun one day, not for notes and schedules. I teach reading at the public school. The children sit in a wide circle and sound out letters with serious faces, and the room feels like a bright engine when their voices rise together. When I carry stacks of books, my right wrist hums with a quiet ache I do not talk about. After school, I stop at the market and choose apples, carrots, and bread. On Fridays, I buy a bouquet for $8 and place it in a chip jar by the sink. Color helps. So does order. I write every bill in a notebook and cross each one out when it is paid. I want proof that I can make a life stand up straight. Some nights Daniel takes long drives to clear his head. He leaves after dinner and returns late, and a strange perfume follows him into the hall. It is sweet and sharp, not our soap, not my lotion. The first time I caught it, I asked where he went. He said, "Nowhere. Don't start." Later, in bed, he held me the way a person holds a pillow, as if I might change shape for him. I lay very still and watched the shadow of the maple tree move across the ceiling like water. I thought of other cities I have only seen in photos, Boston with its brick and wind, Denver with its clear sky, and of London across the ocean in Europe, where my friend Eva once studied and sent me a postcard with Big Ben on it and a note that said, "You would love the fog." She mailed a 10-pound note inside for luck, and I keep it in my dresser like a quiet charm. On the first Saturday in May, I swept the porch and set a bowl of lemons on the windowsill. Mrs. Harper waved from her steps and crossed the street. "Grace," she said, "come with me to New York next month. I have a spare ticket. We can split the hotel, $140 each. I'll even pay the train now, and you can pay me back later." I laughed and said I needed to think. She touched my arm with a dry, steady hand. "Think fast," she said, her voice kind instead of sharp. After she left, I counted the cash in my jar twice, then added $10 from my wallet. The lemons looked like bright coins under the afternoon sun. My father's name is Victor. People in America say he used to manage men who did not wear suits to work, and I do not ask questions about that. He lives in Detroit now, where he runs a small warehouse and stirs his coffee slow. When he calls, he still says kiddo, even though I have lines at the corners of my eyes. He tells me he keeps $2,000 in a safe just because, and I always say I am fine. He answers, "Fine is not the same as free." We talk about my students, the Cleveland Guardians, the stubborn lake wind. When we hang up, the rooms feel steadier, as if the walls remember his voice and decide to stand stronger. That evening I folded laundry and watched the sun slide past the neighbor's roof. Daniel's car was not in the driveway. I boiled pasta, added butter and pepper, and ate at the table alone. The lamp threw a warm circle on the floorboards, and the night pressed its face against the window. I wrote New York on a slip of paper and tucked it under the jar. Then I spoke a plain truth out loud, so I could not pretend I had not said it. I want more. Not fancier, just truer. The house did not argue. The creak kept going. I washed the bowl, dried my hands, and stood for a long time at the door, testing the lock with my palm, the way you press a bruise to learn how deep it goes. The day the house changed started soft. I woke to the creak behind the fence and the smell of coffee. The jar on the shelf held $422 now because I had slipped in a 10 the night before and promised myself I was moving toward New York, toward light. I wiped the counters, set out 2 cups, and waited for Daniel. He came down in a crisp shirt and kissed the top of my head like habit, not love. He said he'd be late that night. Paperwork, he added, the way people add pepper to food, not looking at the plate. All afternoon at school, I felt a thin thread tug behind my ribs. I led the reading circle, but my ear kept turning toward the door, as if bad news wore shoes and might walk in. On the way home, I bought milk, pasta, and a small bunch of pink flowers for $7. The cashier, a woman named Carla, smiled and said, "You always pick the brightest ones." I said, "Color helps," and she nodded as if I had given her a truth she could use. I tucked the receipt in my notebook and drove back to Walnut Street, where the maple made a lace of shade over the steps. I knew before I saw her. The scent reached me first, sweet and sharp, the same strange perfume that had been riding Daniel's jacket for weeks. A woman stood at our car, one heel off the ground as she checked her phone. She had a neat face and a careful coat, even though the day was warm. She looked up and smiled like a challenge. "I'm Chloe," she said, as if I had asked. My name caught in my mouth. The house felt smaller in a blink, as if the walls had stepped closer to hear. I should have breathed. I should have set down the groceries and walked away. Instead, I heard a sound leave me, small and hard. My hand rose before my mind did. The slap cracked the air, not loud, but final. Chloe's head turned and came back slow. She did not cry. She only watched me with clean, cool eyes, then fixed her coat and walked to the sidewalk. Daniel was there already, coming around the corner with his keys in his fist. "What did you do?" he said, but it was not a question. He moved past Chloe without touching her and stepped onto the porch like a storm. He grabbed my wrist. The pain came like a spark, quick and white, then spread across my forearm like fire that knew my name. I gasped and the grocery bag slid, milk thudding, flour spilling. "You need to reflect," he said, voice low and even, as if he were handing me a chore. He pulled me down the hall, my feet catching on the runner, and opened the basement door. The smell of old paint and damp wood rose up. I tried to twist free, but his grip was iron. He shoved me onto the first stair, and the world tipped. Then he pushed me the rest of the way with a flat palm on my back. The bulb hummed. The door closed. The lock turned. I sat on the cold floor and counted the tools on the pegboard because numbers were the one thing that still stood up straight. Hammer. 2 screwdrivers. A bent level. The ache in my wrist pulsed with my heartbeat. I pressed my fingers along the bone and felt a place where the line had changed. I told myself, breathe, then plan. My pocket buzzed. Somehow my phone was still there, small and warm against my leg like a saving coin. I dialed the only number that ever brought the ground back under my feet. "Victor," my father said when he picked up, because he always answered with his own name first, calm and sure. "Dad," I said, and the words steadied the bulb's light. He broke my hand. I told him. He locked me in the basement. The air in Detroit must have been cold because I heard him draw a long breath as if to warm it. "Where are you, kiddo?" he asked, and I told him. "Cleveland, Walnut Street. The house with the maple, United States of America, my own front steps above my head like a ceiling." He went quiet, the way a tide pulls back before it slams the shore. Then I said the sentence I never thought would belong to me, the sentence that felt like metal in my mouth. "Dad, don't let a single one of the family survive." I meant Daniel's side, the little clan that made excuses for him, the men who slapped backs and the women who looked away. I meant the rotten circle that kept turning and called it marriage. I did not mean blood. I meant the system they built and fed. The words still burned as they left me. Victor did not shout. He did not ask me to soften anything. "Listen to me," he said, voice low, the way he spoke when men in Detroit used to move when he raised 2 fingers. "You are mine before you are anyone's wife. I'm on the road now. I will be there tonight. Do not move." I heard drawers open, a door close, an engine start. "There is $3,000 in my glove box," he added, as if naming a tool. "It is for the next door you choose." And Grace, keep talking if you need. The line is open. The line hummed like a wire that could carry more than words. I told him about Mrs. Harper and New York. I told him about the jar on the shelf and the slip of paper under it. I told him I had once held a 10-pound note from London and felt lucky, and how now luck felt like a thing you build with plain hands and a clear name. Above me, the house creaked. Footsteps crossed the kitchen. The faucet ran. The lock stayed shut. I looked at my wrist in the thin light and said another sentence out loud. This one's simple and clean. I am not an anchor, I told the dim room. I am a woman, and I will not sink. Dawn slid down the basement steps in a thin stripe, and I counted the breaths it took for the light to reach the floor. The house above me made the sounds of morning. Pipes ticking, the fridge coughing once, a chair leg scraping, and then it went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. I kept my hand close to my chest. The ache was steady now, a drum under the skin. I told myself I had a body, I had a name, I had a father on the road in America with the speed of need in his hands. When the lock turned, I stood. The door opened to my father's face, calm as a winter lake, lined at the eyes the way Detroit lines steel. Victor wore a plain coat and dark gloves. Behind him stood two men, Noah and Miguel, who filled the doorway like weathers. They did not look wild. They looked ready. The stripe of dawn widened. Grace, my father said, and the way he said my name made the room become a room again, and not a trap. Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, hair rough, mouth set. Get out of my house, he said, but his voice tripped on the word, my. Victor did not answer. He came down the steps one by one and reached for my injured wrist without touching it, the way a doctor studies a wound with his eyes first. He took in the swelling, the thin tremor in my fingers, the shape of what had been done. When he spoke to Daniel, and his voice was soft enough to be a warning. You broke my daughter's hand. Daniel laughed, quick and brittle. She hit a woman, he said. She needs time to reflect. He sounded like a man quoting a bad rule to avoid a good truth. Noah's jaw tightened. Miguel's gaze moved once across the room, landing on the ladder, the paint cans, the bolt on the door that had held me in place. Then my father lifted a palm, and both men went still. It was a small gesture, but the air shifted. The basement belonged to us now. No mess in this house, Victor said, and he looked right at me when he said it. You will sleep here again, and I will not have fear in the walls. He nodded to Noah. Call the lawyer. He nodded to Miguel. Call the police. The words were so clean, I almost cried. Upstairs, the kitchen clock ticked toward certainty. Noah stepped back to the landing and spoke into his phone in a low voice, asking for Eva Price in Chicago, the woman who once sent me a postcard from London and a crisp 10-pound note for luck. Miguel dialed the police and gave our address on Walnut Street, Cleveland, United States of America, in the slow, exact way a person reads a spell. Daniel moved a half step forward, then stopped. Some part of him was counting outcomes and finding fewer than before. He said, We don't need lawyers. We don't need cops. But the word need softened at the edges, as if he heard himself and understood that what he needed and what would happen were not the same. Victor turned to me. Do you want to leave this house now? He asked. It was not a trick. It was a door. I thought about my jar with $422 on the kitchen shelf, the slip of paper that said New York tucked underneath, the door fund that was really a freedom fund. I want to be safe, I said. And I want the truth to count. He nodded as if I had set two heavy things on a table, and he had weighed them and found them right. The sirens came quick, not the long rolling kind, but short, sharp bursts, like the world clearing its throat. Two officers walked in, a woman named Officer Lane and a man named Officer Porter. They were steady, professional, the way streetlights are steady when the weather is bad. They took my name, my statement, photos of the swelling and the bruising and the bolt. They read Daniel his rights in a voice that sounded like a door frame, square, level, not angry, not kind, only sure. He tried a small show of temper and found no audience. When they cuffed him, he stared at me as if the story had betrayed him and was now choosing me instead. Eva called while they were still in the kitchen. Her voice came through Noah's phone, clear and warm, like a soft lamp. "Grace, I'm with you," she said. "We'll get an order of protection today. I can file the paperwork for a temporary restraining order and start the case. My retainer is $6,000 flat. Your father said to invoice him, but I want you to hear the number from me." Victor set a worn money clip on the counter, $6, $500 in cash, and slid it toward Noah with 2 fingers. "Keep the change for speed," he said, and I saw Officer Lane hide a surprised smile at the old-fashioned gesture. After they led Daniel out, the house exhaled. The maple tree held its green silence outside the window. Victor poured water for me and held the glass while I drank. "There is $3,000 in my car," he said, almost shy, as if generosity embarrassed him. "You will use it to choose your next door. If you want Boston, I will help with the first month's rent. If you want New York, I will sit on a train beside you and carry whatever you own." He reached into his coat and gave me a small envelope. Inside was the same crisp 10 pounds from Europe, pressed flat. "For luck," he said. But luck is not required when the papers are clean. I looked around our kitchen. The jar, the lemons, the chipped vase where pink flowers had fallen. The house did not feel like a story I had to survive anymore. It felt like a place I could leave without losing my name. Outside, Mrs. Harper stood on her porch in her red lipstick and wool coat and gave me a long nod that said, "I saw, and I believed you." I wanted to wave. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to begin. So I put my good hand on the new shape of my life the way I had once tested a bruise, and I felt for the place where it would stop hurting and start healing. I left the blue house on Walnut Street on a Tuesday, the sky a clear sheet, my wrists still wrapped and tender. Victor drove, steady as a metronome, while I held a paper cup of coffee that cost $3 and felt like a small fire I could carry. We did not talk much. The air in the car was full of clean plans. My jar money, $4.22, sat in a canvas bag at my feet beside the envelope my father had pressed on me with $3,000. I kept touching the bag with my good hand, counting not the bills but the choices they could buy. Boston met me with brick and wind, just like the photos. We found a walk-up on a quiet street where the trees leaned toward each other like neighbors telling secrets. The lease was $1,200 a month, and the landlord, a kind man named Mr. Donnelly, knocked $50 off the first month because he said the stair light was fickle. The apartment was small, one long room with a sleeping nook and a kitchen you could cross in 5 steps. The windows faced a brick wall, but a square of sky sat on it each morning like a stamp. I signed the lease with my left hand. It did not look like my name, but it was. We spent $78 at a thrift store, a table with a wobble, 2 chairs that matched by accident, a lamp with a shade the color of tea, a bowl for keys. Victor carried each piece up the stairs like he was building me a spine. Before he left, he taped the court papers to the inside of my front door, the order of protection, the temporary restraining order, so the law itself became part of the house. "If you need me, I am a road away," he said. He left 10 pounds on the table, the same London note Eva once sent, pressed flat again. "For luck you can see," he added, and then he hugged me with care for my wrist and went. Eva called that night. Her voice was a warm lamp in the new room. "The judge signed everything," she said. "We'll keep walking this path. Send me your Boston address and I'll file the change." She told me her final invoice would stay at $6,000, no surprise fees. "Clean papers," she said, repeating Victor's line. I told her the lampshade was the color of tea, and she laughed. "Good," she said. "Make the place yours." After we hung up, I wrote to Mrs. Harper. I told her I would still come to New York, just later, when my hand could hold a suitcase without complaint. I taped her reply to the fridge. "The city will wait. So will I." Work came from a nearby after-school program in South Boston. They needed someone to help kids with reading and homework, $22 an hour to start, higher if I stayed past winter. The first afternoon, 6 children sat around a low table and took turns sounding out words, their fingers underlining the air. I moved slow, the way you do when you carry a full glass, and praised every small win. A boy named Aaron read River, without stopping, and looked up as if he had watched a door open all by itself. "You did that," I told him. He grinned, and I felt something in my chest click into place. On Sundays, I walked the waterfront and learned the names of streets by the way they bent. Summer, Congress, Atlantic. I kept a spending list on the table. $1.75 for bread, $4 for apples, $12 for a second-hand coat with a missing button. I added $40 to a new jar marked travel and slid the old slip that said New York underneath. The past tried now and then to fog the glass. Daniel's voice, the hiss of the basement bulb. But the present had bright elbows. I opened the windows even in cold, and the air cleared like a page. Winter came early, crisp and certain. One night, snow lifted the street into a quiet you could hear. I made cocoa and stood by the window and watched the flakes choose their places. I thought of Europe across the water, of Eva's postcard, of churches with bell towers that count the hours out loud. I did not feel far from anything good. I felt placed. I wrote my name in my notebook with my left hand, then with my right, which trembled but obeyed. Both looked like me. In January, I took the train to New York with a small bag and a soft scarf. Mrs. Harper met me at the station in a red hat like a flag you can follow. We walked until our feet hummed and still kept walking. We spent $18 on 2 coffees and 2 pastries, and a paper crown a vendor said was worth every penny. I put the crown on my head and let myself laugh, loud and easy, the kind of laugh that forgets to ask permission. The lights did what she promised. They woke a tired part of me and told it to stand. When I came back to Boston, the apartment felt larger, as if while I was gone it had practiced being a home and gotten good at it. I set the paper crown on the wobbly table and wrote 3 lines on a card to tape above the light switch. I am not an anchor. I am a woman. I float. I steer, I land. I put $60 in the jar. I fixed the missing button with clumsy stitches and wore the coat anyway. I called Victor and told him about the lights, and he said in his slow way, "Good. Keep moving toward what is bright." Then, in a small voice that still surprises me when it shows up in my own mouth, I said, "Dad, I am free." He did not speak for a long breath. When he did, he said, "Yes, Grace, you are."